public service television, commercial television, linear broadcasting, on-demand services, mainstream storytelling, diverse stories and narratives. The modern TV landscape is varied and complex, with many forms and formats, and my guest this week is the perfect example of a TV executive who has successfully straddled them all. Peter Andrews started his career at Australian broadcaster Channel 7, before moving to the channel's commercial competitor Network 10, and since 2013 has been head of network programming at public broadcaster SBS. So he's seen all sides of the Australian TV business, working across every genre of programming, and leading the charge into digital distribution, which has been key to SBS's proposition to the viewer. Peter talks about his formative years in TV at 7 and 10, how SBS in its 50th year continues to focus on innovation and differentiation, building empathy and diversity into everything that SBS does, and how a British TV exec with a strong Aussie connection could be his best advocate in the celestial court. Enjoy. Hi, Peter. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Danny. Thank you so much for having me.
My absolute pleasure. I always like to start with a fun question, which is, in the classic movie A Matter of Life and Death, David Niven gets to choose the person who will represent him in the celestial court so that he can return to Earth. If you were choosing someone from the international TV business to represent you in the celestial court, who would you choose and why?
That is a great question and has many ways of approaching it, given the wonderful industry we work in. You know, I know the movie very well, and I think in the US it was titled Stairway to Heaven, I think. So it was a classic movie, and one that I think, it's a great way to kick off a chat. And I would say, for me, in this cutthroat industry that's going through, quite some seismic transformation. I don't know, putting my eternal fate into someone else's hands feels a little bit risky, maybe. So I suppose, without sounding self-righteous, I'd probably want to represent myself. Now, having said that, it's a fascinating industry we work in, and I've worked with, the most collegiate people and also probably the most carnivorous people in the business. And that's, I think, the, amazing thing of the, the industry that we work in. So, for every brilliant mentor that you work with, there's always someone who probably sell their grandmother, for some, more ratings. So, I know I've been very fortunate to work with lots of amazing people. So, I sort of come back to the fact that, having that privilege of working with some incredible people, or having a brilliant titan within the industry to represent myself, in the celestial court. And, as I said, I've worked with some incredible legends. I think I'd take my chances. And
what about if the court said you can't represent yourself?
You can't represent yourself.
You have to.
I knew you'd ask that. I knew you would. I've had the privilege of meeting Jay Hunt a couple of times in my history. I don't know Jay very well, but I've admired her from a distance, and I've admired what she's been able to do through her, transformation through, BBC and I think Channel 4 and Apple. And I think I've been in safe hands there only because Australians look after each other. And Jay is an Aussie, believe it or not. So maybe that would be my column B answer.
Sounds like you would be in good hands and having a fine advocate on your behalf. Well, we'll talk about what some of the future holds and some of the areas of the business that will evolve. But looking back now, what first attracted you to the TV business, and how did you get your start in the industry, which I think was at Channel 7?
Correct. So probably sounds a little bit cliched, but I was very much a lover of story. I think when I was a kid, I had a bit of a quite a burgeoning imagination. And when I was told stories or watched, movies or read books, I would often, my mind would sort of race with possibilities of, oh, how could this story move on, or where could these characters go, or what are the worlds that that really sort of excite me. And so I think that first connection with content, whether it be, as I said, books or movies or even radio, was just something that really appealed to my senses. And then as I grew as a child and became a teenager, there was a one moment in my life that I still hold dear, and it was actually watching an old a classic television series on, I think, Channel 10 it may have been, or maybe Channel 7, called Simon Townsend's Wonder World. And on that show, they interviewed a legend of the Australian television industry called Glenn Kinging. And Glenn was interviewed about his job, his role as a television programmer. And I remember sitting back, I think after school, watching this and went, wow, that's a pretty cool job. I wouldn't mind that. Fast forward, I don't know, 10 years to university. And after failing dismally as an accountant, I decided to probably pursue an area of passion, which was media and content and storytelling. So I went to university and did a Bachelor of Arts in Media Studies, and I loved it. But to be fair, I probably spent more time at the pub than actually at university. But at the pub, we were chatting with friends and colleagues about stories and movies and music and content. And I think that's what was the first spark. And so then I went, okay, well, I need to clearly find a career, that is sort of adjacent to my passion. And I wrote handwritten letters, yes, well before emails, to all the current networks in Australia, actually, to 7, 9, 10, ABC, I think at the time. And I got responses from everyone, which was delightfully surprising. Went through interviews, but the sort of situation was, nothing is available. But I think persistence was the thing that really drove me and my passion. And I think I was able to demonstrate that. So about a couple of months later, I got a call from Ian Duncan, who was the program director at 7 in Melbourne. And he said, look, I don't have a job that you may love, but I got a job. I went, okay, well, I will take that. And it was working in the presentation department of the sort of 7 Melbourne office, you're working in the area which was ACR. I don't even know what ACR stands for, but it was these 2-inch block tapes that you'd put into a machine. And though that machine would put the ads and the promos live to air, and I'd be communicating with the master control department. And I, did that for 6 months and realized that was not a job for me. How do I get out of that? So I think I sort of sneakily coordinated an attack with Ian and said, this is not working out for me. Is there anything else? That's the long version of getting my foot in the door at 7. And from that point, I was pretty passionate and persistent about what I wanted to do. And it was to work in the sort of content programming team. And a lucky break came up, and Ian eventually, there was an opportunity where I sort of got my, be able to sort of like get my teeth stuck into it. And that was sort of like late 90s. And from there, I think I was able to demonstrate my passion for storytelling and content. And, that's was sort of just like really just probably being annoying to everyone around me. So they just tell me to shut up and just give me jobs, promote me through that way.
And you started in the Melbourne office, but then became program manager in Sydney. Is there
Yeah.
a different TV culture between Melbourne and Sydney?
There actually are some really nuances, differences between the two markets. They're two big cities, obviously, two big international cities, big populations. Sydney is probably more international. Melbourne is probably more parochial. And the one thing, or the couple of things that you get asked when you live in Melbourne is, what school did you go to, and which Aussie rules team do you follow? And those two things, believe it or not, as sort of basic as they sound, are actually what really drives the culture of Melbourne. It's sort of sport and sort of and connections, and then a great restaurant culture. And Melburnians are so parochial, and that extends to the other cities that are sort of in the sort of eastern side of Australia, or sort of as you move east. So, I'm sorry, as you move west, Adelaide and Perth, very parochial cities as well. And even Brisbane is quite a parochial city. So when you think about just cities in Melbourne being a very heavily urbanized country, but then with lots of regional areas, understanding the nuances between all those cities is really important working in the industry that we work in. And I think, I've certainly been fortunate to work in a few of the cities to understand the nuance and the difference. And as I go back to the fact that, there's a lot of parochial audiences that love to see their city or their stories on screen. Whereas Sydney, and I don't want to make massive generalizations, but in Sydney, it's a broader, bigger city. And so it can be a bit more international, but with incredible diversity across the city. So one of the things that I have the privilege of working now in my current role at SBS is understanding where all the communities are and how we can speak to all those communities, whether it's metropolitan or regional. And we can talk about that a little bit later if you want to. But there are some key differences between Sydney and Melbourne, and it's sort of probably interrelated to that sort of parochial nature of sport and love of Aussie rules, and it's a bit of a religion in Melbourne. In Sydney, different codes of sport. NRL, which is the National Rugby League, is the sort of heart and soul of Sydney in terms of sport, and Australia being such a sporting and competitive industry as well, that those things tend to interrelate and intertwine.
In 2002, you moved to Network 10 as network program manager. The Australian TV market is famously very competitive, fiercely competitive. How did you find the switch from 7 to 10, and how did they compare and contrast?
It's a very, very good question, because it does, I think, give some insight into the competitive nature of the business. And I think I've been, personally, I've witnessed it personally. Moving from 7 to 10 was a choice I made because it gave me such an incredible opportunity to grow professionally and work with a network that was sort of a bit of an underdog. And I was very, very fortunate to have my sort of early career and the trajectory of my career through the great people I worked with at 7. But the opportunity that I was offered at 10 was sort of too hard to put down. But being a young guy, I would say, young boy, and still quite naive, I learnt very quickly the lesson of the competitive nature of the business. And 7 did not want me to go, and 10 was saying, well, aren't you coming? So all I can say, and I don't know if this is code, but I know potentially a lot of your listeners will understand that my garden looked beautiful after 3 or 4 months. And I eventually, commenced my role at 10, and, notice personally it was a great move for me, but certainly was, firsthand a witness to the competitive nature of Australian television, that sort of, any edge that you might give a competitor, someone will try and shut that down. So I can't go into much more detail than that, but the roses were beautiful after a while. Then, and then the differences between 10 and 7 were pretty visceral at the time for me, Danny. I came from 7 again, wonderful opportunity that really gave me the platform to springboard my career. But 10 was, a sort of scrappy, underdog, as I say, and did not have the budgets that 7 or 9, or at the time, probably Foxtel as well, and were, known for a lot of American content. I think when I arrived at 10 and I was working very closely with the amazing David Mott, I came on board and we had The Simpsons, Melrose Place, Beverly Hills 90210, and a sort of a Neighbours and a little local Tonight Show called The Panel. And that was about it. And then sort of the first sort of big swing was Big Brother. And that sort of really helped push 10 in the right direction. And it was from that sort of things grew. But yeah, the noticeable differences between 7 and 10 were, scale, were budget, were, I made a joke, I think, when I started with 10 and David Mott, the sort of, the reams of paper of the avails, the content avails, the series that 7 had, would be like a doorstop, but the series and avails that 10 had would slide under the door. So it was that was sort of the differences. I was working with much less, and the cliche is, when you have less, you tend to probably work harder, and it pushes you in that sort of direction of success. So yeah, there were sort of noticeable financial differences, culturally, culturally quite different as well at the time. Again, I think that sort of sense of 10 being the underdog and not really having much just created a really collegiate sense of need to win and fiercely compete, in the industry, but not in any sort of egotistical way. It was always about we were very, very clear about what we were trying to achieve. That really sort of brought together the culture of the teams that we work with, and it gave us a sense of purpose and direction.
You were negotiating large-scale acquisitions across formats, as you mentioned, like Big Brother, MasterChef Australia, and US series like Dexter. How did you get your first exposure to acquisitions, and who helped you to navigate this world? And how did you find that area of the business?
I found it incredibly energizing. I give full credit to David Mott again, who sort of took me under his wing. He was, so inclusive. He was never afraid to take a risk and was always sort of thinking about innovation. So, in terms of, whether it's original formats that 10 network launched developed and commissioned and launched, or whether it was choosing the right content from an acquisitions point of view, I certainly was given such a wonderful opportunity to work side by side with David, and really learn, get a bit of a masterclass in, in risk taking and innovation in the content space. And, I think his mantra was, well, if we're going to fail, let's just learn from the failure. And I know it's now become a bit of a cliche around failing and failing fast and all those things, but we really were. We were, again, 10 was coming from a place of, we had sort of nothing to lose. We knew our audience. And so what are the things we really want to invest in? And so we sat down and we sort of looked at, okay, well, we had, some incredible formats that were starting to pop, as I mentioned, Big Brother. And then next came Australian Idol. And then next came Thank God You're Here. And then on top of that, we had some dramas that were really speaking to our audience, like Secret Life of Us. And obviously after that, Offspring. I think we, really, really understood our audience. We had some great entertainment formats, whether it was acquired or again commissioned. Queer Eye for the Straight Guy just popped the US version. It was massive for us. And then, we're able to just building blocks in the wall across the schedule, just be able to build and retain audiences. I remember the day we launched the series House with Hugh Laurie. I mean, that just exploded on the scene in Australia, and that was another sort of just wow. This is just fantastic. So we were building I suppose, a repertoire of content that was sticking. Our audience started to trust us. I think those things helped, and I think that was an incredible opportunity for me and I'm so grateful for that opportunity. But at the same time, we had some things that didn't work and things that didn't pop. And I think anyone who says that they've never had any sort of failures, or haven't had any sort of content things that have failed, I think they just haven't taken risks, or they haven't they're not being truthful. So yeah, that time, and certainly between sort of 2003 to 2012 at 10 was, we were barnstorming. We were sort of really in our zone. We knew our audience. There was pressure from the board to sort of broaden our audience out a little bit. We were really nailing it with 16 to 39s, and we were number one in that demographic for so long. This is pre-streaming. I mean, as like certainly before we had, the likes of Netflix or Disney Plus or Amazon Prime or, the players, the digital players in our territory. But we were absolutely owning that demographic, and there's a bit of pressure from the board to expand. And I think that's where we started to lose a bit of our focus, when you start to move out of your lane. And that was a big lesson for me as well, is like, stick to your lane, know it, and deliver it.
And you talk about something like House being a big success, and I think that speaks to some extent how acquisitions and US shows in particular, I guess, were quite important in the Australian market. But how important were they? And having those
Mm.
output deals then, and how has that changed?
Well, I think it's changed quite significantly, to be honest. Again, if you go back to sort of like the mid 2000s, 2005 to 2010, there was incredible heat and competition around all the output deals that the US studios were sort of bringing to market. And it could sort of sink a network, or bring a network to major success if you landed the right output deal at the right time. And I can certainly remember the time when the Seven Network, were a beneficiary of having Desperate Housewives, Lost, and Grey's Anatomy, pretty much within 18 months of that time. And that just redefined Seven. And then off the back of that, they were able to build from that. So, as I think we all understand, one show can change, or deliver some incredible results for a network, and the audience see that, and they come for the journey. Having said that, now I think the output deals have changed immensely. They still exist, but in different ways, given the sort of competition for content. I can certainly share an anecdote when, again, David Mott and I were sitting there at the 10 network, and every network had a Sunday night movie, 8:30 on a Sunday night. It was tradition. It was something that, and the output deals, from the US studios absolutely fed that content to the networks to allow the networks to do an 8:30 Sunday night movie. And they would, those titles would absolutely deliver. And part of the science and art of programming back then was, you knew that Channel 9 had, I don't know, Bad Boys, and Seven had Sleeping with the Enemy, or Pretty Woman. And we, you would look at the titles, and you would be programming against audience tastes and demographics. But I remember David and I had this conversation. We said, let's move away from movies. And we put series onto Sunday night. And I remember we launched, I think it was with Law and Order Criminal Intent. And off the back of that, it might have been Law and Order SVU. Anyway, it was part of that franchise. And there was a big headline, I think, that David Mott still had in his office, which was, Channel 10 has killed the Sunday night movie. We did that. It's a reflection of the what the output deals were from the studios were providing, and how could you maximize the best ROI on that content. And so that was a big move strategically. And I think, now, I mean, having saying that now, it sounds quite anachronistic, doesn't it? Talking about sort of pulling a Sunday movie, and changing the strategy. But, that's how big that move was, and it got headlines.
You joined SBS in 2013 to become head of network programming, responsible for the overall programming and content strategy for SBS, SBS On Demand, SBS Viceland, SBS Food, and SBS World Movies. So a big brief.
I should be busy, shouldn't I?
So what was that brief, and when you joined,
yeah.
and how has that role evolved over time?
It was a big move for me to go from the 10 network to SBS. I'll firstly say, and this is not a sales pitch at all, is that I feel like I'm home. I feel like I've found the right place. I feel like I'm very, very lucky to be at an organization that is culturally so responsible and so viscerally, led with a people first culture, which is amazing. But I will answer your question. And, my initial brief was actually sort of first seemed deceptively simple in a way. It was like build a world-class team. Like look at the current team, look outside and how can we evolve SBS and our content team into a world-class team. SBS has had a history where, we're a public service broadcaster, but with, we're a hybrid public broadcaster. So we also can lean into the commercial side and advertising revenue. So it was sort of, my brief was a little bit about how can we build a really strong team, and then from there build a really, really strong content proposition. But, having noted that we already had a really, really clear purpose and charter and a really strong content proposition, how can I be additive to that, but really build the team? And leadership was a big focus, a big brief of mine. That was the first part of it. And then secondly, it quickly became apparent to me that not just leadership, but also digital innovation was a big part of my brief as well. And so they were the two sort of focus areas. Get the team right first. I didn't have a lot of time. I wasn't given, I thought I was, given a bit of as I said, I thought it was a bit of deceptively simple task at the time, but I was only given 6 months to do that. And I think, in hindsight, you probably needed a little bit more time to do that, to see how people operate, how the collaboration is and how we work cross-functionally and all those things. But yeah, it was a brief that, I sort of, I suppose, grabbed with both hands. And, when I look back now, I think, we've achieved a lot and built an incredibly world-class team and been absolute innovators in the digital space. So, whether, that was my initial brief, and obviously briefs change along the journey. But that's sort of, where I sort of came in and said, what are the things we really want to achieve?
So touching on digital, having started your career in linear, terrestrial, and multi-channel TV, how did you and the team approach this new non-linear distribution of TV content?
Well, I approached it with an arms wide open approach. We felt, part of SBS's purpose, and our charter and even our sort of our strategic sort of goals in a way are about innovation. So, I think the whole business approached digital acceleration, with such open arms, and we felt that, we don't want to turn away from linear. We just want to maintain and maintain our linear presence and maintain our linear audience, but grow digital and grow it aggressively. And we did. We set off on this journey, and I'm going to sort of mention Marshall Heald, who became my new sort of, I suppose, my own North Star at SBS, because Marshall came across to our content sort of side of the business in 2015, and we sat down and we went, okay, what do we want to achieve, and what is it we really, really sort of want to work on over the next sort of 5 years? And it was digital acceleration. And it really was about growing SBS On Demand as a platform. We knew the other streamers were coming, and we had a very, very clear strategy and a very, very clear, incredible support from the board and the executive to say, yes, this is the right strategy. And what it was not turn our backs on linear, but understand that audiences are consuming content in new ways, and how can we be leaders in that? So we started, I remember personally having conversations at MIPCOM with a lot of distributors back in 2014, around the time, and a lot of distributors, and I'm not trying to be a twee or cocky about this, but I remember talking about wanting to acquire VOD rights for certain content, and their responses, well, we don't even have that in our system to, check the box to say we can sell you VOD rights, because it's not part of our business, strategy. So we were sort of thinking, okay, well, maybe one studio at a time, because we knew that the SVODs were coming. So how do we sort of position ourselves that we can also compete in that digital space? So we were certainly very early in sort of acquiring AVOD or BVOD rights, which we knew were competitive with SVOD rights, but it was there to position ourselves in an area of content that we knew our audience loved, which is a lot of the foreign language drama. That was our first sort of approach, and foreign language movies. And we built, I think, what's become now in terms of SBS On Demand, an incredibly well respected and well trusted platform that's got the highest ratings on the Android and Apple App Store in terms of streaming apps, and we're really proud of the product behind the content that we provided. So that was the biggest thing in terms of the transition between linear and non-linear or digital. Was let's be absolutely focused on what the audience want, but not move away from what is traditional and what we know, which is great story and great content. And as long as we're able to provide that for our audience, I think we'll be successful. And the other part to it was also we understood that our competitors were, we were, I suppose, came from a place of we didn't have the biggest market share in linear. So we could sort of take a couple more risks and maybe be a little bit more aggressive in that space. And so we are really, really, we're certainly well on this journey of digital. And, a lot of people who speak about digital is future. Well, I think, we knew that 10 years ago, and we've been sort of on that journey.
Because Australia is a fascinating market when it comes to digital innovation, in that you've got global streamers who've attracted big audiences and numbers of subscribers, but also
Mm,
with a local streaming service in
mm.
Stan, an SVOD service,
Stan, yeah,
which
yeah.
has thrived, and local SVOD services haven't had that same level of success in many territories. So I
Mm,
guess in a way, the bar for success for SBS On Demand was a little bit higher because of the intensely competitive nature of the market. And so
mm,
finding ways to
mm,
differentiate yourself must have been
mm.
absolutely crucial.
100%. We have, our focus on differentiation, even sort of, we call it hyper differentiation. It's so important that our distinctiveness across all our content genres stands out. And so, our North Star is our purpose, it's our charter. And what I think is really, really, I suppose, refreshing or comforting is the world is moving in that same direction. Like, and what I mean by that is, traditionally a lot of SBS original content has been quite specific because it, puts diversity and inclusion front and center, in our content. And um, it's not everyone's taste, but I think it's wonderful that the world is waking up to that. And so a lot of our original content that is made directly for our purpose and charter now does travel internationally, and that's a wonderful thing. And so yes, your comment about SBS really needing to differentiate itself is vital in our sort of strategic positioning, and even more so as we move into the future when we see the amount of I think the way the industry is transforming, the amount of fast channels that are popping up, which are all sort of genre led or single IP channels, that sort of in a strange way creates a little bit of confusion within the market from an audience perspective of where you actually are in terms of a destination when you're choosing content. And that's so important for us is, we want our audience to absolutely understand each of our channel brands, understand where they are within the sort of portfolio. And that's across, not just our video, but also audio as well. And so, yeah, our differentiation is absolutely our North Star as well.
Talking about that differentiation, And talking about the content that you guys create, can you define an SBS original series? And what do you and the team look for when SBS invests in original series?
100%. I mean, original series, depending on what genre, it's something that we certainly don't make light of in terms of what what actually defines an SBS series. So I would sort of go back to, I think this is going back sort of 12, 13 years ago now. Before my time, we had a series that I think really defined and really gave the audience a great understanding of what SBS was about. And it was a series, and it's a format that's now traveled to the UK. It's called Go Back to Where You Came From. That was a groundbreaking series that put obviously it shone a spotlight on a very hot topic at the time. It spoke to social inclusion, diversity, again, a hot button topic that that needed to be spoken about. And so SBS creating that series in conjunction with CJZ was sort of defining at its time. And so we ended up, I think, producing 4 or 5 versions of that because it was able to explore and celebrate diversity, but in a very sort of not shying away from the issue at the time. I can speak about now currently. We've about to launch our 3rd season of a series that we commissioned after noticing how well the international version was performing on our VOD platform, which is Alone. So we're about to go into our 3rd version of Alone Australia. And that is authentic characters telling authentic stories. It's not just a survival program. It's actually a series that speaks to, loneliness and personal growth and, being exposed to extreme conditions. But ultimately, it is a story of human connection. And we've just noticed how our audience have just embraced that now, whether that's a post-pandemic, a sort of like an antidote to the pandemic. I'm not really sure, but we've just been celebrating the success of that series. And again, I think that really defines an SBS series that's authentic, that is cast with incredible diversity, and really does unite our audiences. And then sort of I suppose I can just speak about on the scripted side. We've just finished a series that we've put out in the last couple of months called 4 Years Later, which was a beautiful love story of a Hindi couple that are separated by career, and this reconnection after 4 years of what's the ripple effect after 4 years of what happens to this couple. Shot in Mumbai and India and in Sydney, and it's cross-cultural, a beautiful love story. It's 8x30, and we've been so amazed with how the audience have embraced this story of true color, romance, and incredible connections between individuals. And we launched it, around a Diwali, and I think it just brought together communities, and it's just so amazing to see the audience embrace a series like that. So again, on the scripted space, something that's really distinctive, but absolutely speaks to diversity and inclusion. That's SBS. That's our North Star in terms of scripted. So I could probably speak for another 2 hours about what else works for SBS, but no, it really is about sort of it's our purpose, and our charter is so important. So if we're leading into that and delivering on that, then I think we're doing our job, and and absolutely delivering on our purpose.
SBS celebrates its 50th birthday in 2025. What plans are in place to celebrate, and how do you see SBS evolving? I mean, I could say in the next 50 years, but just in the upcoming years, because the next probably 5 years will feel like the last 50 years in terms of how the world changes much
It's
more.
changing, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, look, we're just going to have a massive party and invite everyone. No, I would love that. We look, we're certainly, taking the opportunity to celebrate, 50 years of SBS and our purpose again, and our what is our reason for existence in Australia, and it is about uniting and creating the opportunity for exploring and celebrating diversity. So we're going to front and center spend that time, and it's around sort of mid-year next year. So we've got some incredible series that will sort of content that will sort of be highlighted around that time. We're going to celebrate it in a fun way with a bit of retrospective, nostalgic content that the audience will be very familiar with. That is SBS content. That's SBS shows. We're also going to commission a couple of original series that speaks to the idea of Australia and what it means to be Australian, and SBS's role and purpose in that. But I say that in a way that it's not a navel-gazing piece. It's something that is outward looking and obviously something that will speak to, hopefully entertain the audience and give them a sense of our existence. But ultimately, it's the fabric of Australia. And then another original event that we'll be sort of putting around that time, or putting to air around that time, is again a sort of nostalgic view of what Australia has been through over the years, and how SBS has contributed to that, but through a bit of a celebrity lens and a nostalgic lens. So we're going to have a bit of fun with that. And then also our 50th anniversary lands around some pretty key content moments that are just very fortunately timed. So we have the Tour de France in 2025, which is a big sporting event for us, and I think this is no spoiler, but I think the final season of The Handmaid's Tale will launch around then. So there'll be some great content across the board, but ultimately we're just we'll be looking to highlight the fact that we've 50 years ago we kicked the door down and said here we are.
You talked earlier about your brief at SBS being about the team and about people and the importance of being a people first business. Leadership in creative businesses is complex for sure and can be culturally specific. How has your leadership style evolved, do you think, in your time at SBS, and also in general, how has leadership in Australian TV changed over that period?
Firstly, I'll say that I've been so fortunate and grateful to work for an organisation that puts leadership, really in the spotlight and invests in leadership. So SBS, absolutely, it's no gimmick. It really does spend a lot of time. Our people and culture team, curate incredible events for, the business and leaders within the business to be part of and really learn. And we have this, even big part of SBS's thing called SBSU, which stands for SBS University. And it's like, there are all these modules that, in your spare time, you can just get involved and really understand other ways, little tactics, little tools in your, little, things in your toolkit around leadership. But, look, ultimately, my leadership style has evolved over the years. And I think I've been really fortunate again to see how not to lead. I think you can learn a lot from bad leadership or bad management than you can from good leadership. I won't mention any names, but I've been privy to some people who I've noticed just sort of, wow, that is not what you do. And you can learn very quickly from that. So I think adapting to that, but, look, I certainly don't want to come across as cliche, but authentic leadership is so important to me. Empathy, gratitude, they're superpowers in leadership, especially in this sort of business. I think inclusion, and when I mean inclusion in conversations and empowering people, creating opportunities for mentorships, allowing people to have a voice from different perspectives and different, different perspectives, I suppose, and just creating the space for people to have opinions. Certainly not being, command leadership, the military style of leadership. And I've seen that, and I've seen that's where it's failed dismally in this business, where it's sort of chain of command. I think that's so old school, and it makes me cringe. anyone who attests to that form of leadership, or maybe, there's probably, it works perhaps in the military, but I don't think in collaborative industries and industries that need, connection. And we're working with, grey areas. We're working with areas that aren't necessarily right or wrong. We use a lot of data to back up our decisions, but empowering people to have a voice, I think, is really important. And I've learned so much over the last sort of few years to sort of listen rather than speak, to be able to, take on a number of different perspectives and then potentially make a decision. I think that's really important. And then, in terms of cultural competency, that's a big part, I think, of what we do at SBS. So it's about sort of, a real focus on, underrepresented voices and allowing those voices to be told, giving space again for those voices, or, that content to be visible. Big part of what I do and what the team do, ensuring that sort of those, underrepresented voices or opportunities are given the space. Again, I use the word empathy, an understanding of audiences. What do they want, with local or global? What our audiences want to know, are we listening to our audience? I'm sort of really, really excited about an initiative that our audience and insights team are about to do in the next couple of weeks, which is an audience festival. This is at SBS, an internal festival where we get to listen and talk about the audience. And we're spending a whole week on it. That's incredible. It's so empowering. And I'm so grateful to be an organization that spends the time to do that. And from that, hopefully things come out of that. So yeah, the things, it's the soft skills that I've learned over the last few years. It's, the emotional intelligence and things where you just really, I think, use those superpowers around gratitude and empathy to really, set an example for future leaders as well.
Finally, I always like to finish with a fun question about media. So, if you were asked to schedule an evening of programming that defined Peter Andrews' TV career, which series would you choose? Or you can throw in some movies as well. But what would that what would that look like?
Well, I'd just say, just jump on SBS On Demand and choose anything you want. But no. I assume you're wanting a bit more of a traditional schedule. Is that right? A bit of a linear schedule.
Well, it could be a Peter Andrews Fast channel.
It could be. Okay. Look, that's a really good question. Gosh, I've got to think about that one. Let's just go with traditional linear, and then we can sort of maybe add in some sugar around that. But I'd start the night off. Let's say we're at 6:30. We also actually program on the half hour here in Australia, not the top of the clock. So at 6:30 p.m. I'd be loyal to our SBS World News, because it's always good to have a global perspective, not just what's happening locally. So I think I would sort of kick off the night with news, and I'd certainly be watching SBS World News. There's a shameless plug there. It's really interesting. I look back at my career and the opportunities I've had, and one show that still sticks with me, and it's funny. I remember when I joined SBS a few years back, and we were talking about content, and I said, you know what, Big Brother actually is the perfect SBS series. Now, it's never been on SBS. It was on 10, I think, maybe even 9 and 7. And obviously, I think Channel 4 and Channel 5 in the UK, I think it's had a couple of homes there. But, it was sort of pre-social media, but it was the series that everyone was speaking about. So I'd sort of have, an SBS version of Big Brother in there, but that sort of, just brings me back to, my days at 10. Then at 8:30, again, another shameless plug, but I'm loving what we've been doing with Alone and Alone Australia, because it really is so immersive. It's a documentary, but it's also just like you get to know people. So that would have to be in there, because it's been a big part of my, the last few years at SBS. And I've really sort of we've been so fortunate to see how well the audiences have embraced that. And then I'd probably, at 9:30, gosh, I need some escapist drama at 9:30, Danny. So, I've just finished The Diplomat season 2 on Netflix, and I'm a big Kerry Russell, going back to Felicity days. So, potentially, something like The Diplomat or an escapist drama at 9:30. And then, as I said, I'd probably flick to SBS On Demand and start watching, some incredible, movies or comedy. And I'd have to tuck myself in by about 11:30 p.m. I'll be done by then.
Very good. Well, Peter Andrews, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. It's been a fascinating chat. And
Thank you, Danny. Thank you for having me. It's been wonderful to have a chat, and thank you for the opportunity. I'm very grateful.
oh, well, not at all. I mean, from a personal perspective, I always look forward to chatting with executives from SBS who are always a delight to work with. And
Oh, thank you.
and today has been no exception. So congrats to you for leading that team and to SBS for 50 years of broadcasting.
Thank you, Danny. Hope to see you soon when I get the opportunity to come over again to London.
Excellent.